Hi everyone, this is Eric Bond, the founder of Beat The GMAT, and welcome to the last day of our week-long webinar series where we are deep diving integrated reasoning, the new section that is going to be tested on the new GMAT, which is coming out on June 5th, just a couple weeks away. So this week we have been going through a deep analysis of each of the different question types in this new integrated reasoning section. And tonight we are going to be joined by a top GMAT expert, Becky Robinson, who will be deep diving the two-part analysis question type that you'll find on integrated reasoning. Before I hand it over to Becky, I want to just share a little bit about her background. So if you're thinking in the back of your mind, hey, her name sounds kind of familiar, well, you probably should if you're an active Beat the GMAT community member, because she is one of the top experts within the Beat the GMAT community and a very active forum participant. Many of you have been able to witness her teaching style and her expertise firsthand. We're very fortunate to have her as part of our community. But at the Princeton Review, she is a Master Instructor. She's taught for the Princeton Review for over 15 years, and I really like this about her too. She's a self-professed test lover. That's someone that is going right after my own heart. As a fellow test lover, it's really great to know someone else who is passionate about standardized tests and also equally passionate about helping others to achieve great results on the GMAT and other standardized tests as well. So Becky, thank you so much for sharing your evening with us and for teaching us about two-part analysis.
Oh, thank you very much, Eric, and thanks to everybody who's sharing their Friday evening learning about the GMAT. Must be a few other test lovers out there. So tonight I get the benefit of working with two-part analysis on this next generation GMAT that will be coming out on June 5th. But before I jump into that, I thought I'd just start by giving a quick introduction in case not everybody's been to every one of these. So everybody's heard the GMAT is changing. What's changed and how much is it changing? Really, all they're doing is replacing the analysis of an issue essay with a new 30-minute integrated reasoning section. So this is a new section that will be scored in a different way. The integrated reasoning section is going to get its own separate score independently on a 1 to 8 point scale, and the calculator will be provided on the integrated reasoning. This is the only thing that's changing about the GMAT. What hasn't changed are your traditional essay, math, and verbal scores will not be affected, with the exception of the essay will only be based on one essay, and the length of the test is not affected because the new integrated reasoning section is the 30 minutes, the same length as the old analysis of an issue essay. So that's kind of what we're talking about today. And so what's involved in the integrated reasoning section? And it's kind of a complicated thing to talk about, and those of you who've been here every night probably know quite a bit about this. You're going to have 30 minutes to complete 12 questions. And here in my presentation, I've put that word questions in quotation marks because it's really pages of questions and information, because each page, or each question as the GMAC is calling it, can have multiple parts. So each page will be consistent of one type of question. Of the 4 types, we have the table analysis, the graphics interpretation, the multi-source reasoning, which were all covered previously in the week, and then finally what we're going to deep dive into today with the two-part analysis. So each one of these has multiple questions per page, and that's how they're going to be scoring. What's interesting is that you must get all parts of a question correct to get credit for it. That means that if you get any one of the multiple questions on a page incorrect, you will not get credit for that particular page. And you can't skip or go back to questions, although it is not adaptive in the traditional way that the GMAT has been to date. It is going to be a linear section, and everybody will get the same questions, but maybe not in the same order. And what's interesting about the integrated reasoning, and one reason I'm starting to really enjoy it, is that it really is a blending of the math and verbal. That's what we're looking at for integrated reasoning, which means it's a new way of testing the traditional knowledge base that's being tested on the GMAT. So if you're one of those students who's been studying for the traditional GMAT and just realized that the format's going to change and for scheduling or other reasons you won't be able to take the GMAT before June 5th, your knowledge base for what you have to know to do well on questions will not change at all. It's just a new way of interpreting the same types of information. Basically, what happened was business school faculty has asked for a section on the test that shows how students deal with multiple parts of data and multiple points of information and combining them in the same math and logic ways that you've been working in the other sections of the test. So getting into my particular expertise of the night, the two-part analysis section. Each two-part analysis page, or question as the GMAC calls it, will have 2 columns of questions from 1 prompt of information, which means you're going to have to pick 2 answers in order to get the credit for that page of questions. Two-part analysis is the one part of integrated reasoning which really doesn't introduce any new type of data. I think you guys are going to feel most comfortable looking at the question stems and really recognize a lot of the traditional math and verbal that you've seen on other parts of the test as you are studying. Unlike graphic analysis or multi-source reasoning, where you're really looking at new types of information. Within each column, and we'll see one of these in just a sec, you'll have only one set of answers. So you're going to choose one answer for each column. And it's very interesting because one answer, the same answer can be correct for both questions, or they can have different answers. So what makes two-part analysis different? Why did it get adopted into this integrated reasoning section when it's fairly similar to what you've already been doing? And to talk about that, let me show you an example question. So here's an example question of something that you would see as a two-part analysis. So you see a very familiar setup of a question stem in the middle, some information, and some answer choices down the bottom. The difference is this time we see these 2 columns of information. These 2 columns of information can be completely independent of each other, or they can be interactive. And I think that's the biggest issue with two-part analysis, is when are these 2 pieces of information working together, and when are they codependent upon each other. So, and these columns are also something that the GMAT has kind of put in as another opportunity to make a mistake, because you can essentially do all of the calculations and computations correctly and still accidentally put the wrong information in each column. So here we have a sample question. In the table below, identify the least possible sum when selecting an even number from each set and the product of the smallest prime number from each set. Make only 2 selections, 1 in each column. So that prompt is going to be the most important. What we're seeing in these two-part analysis questions is that there's a lot of nuance in the language of the prompt, and you have to really understand what you're doing with the information. So as we look, the first is don't just trust the headers. Here it says least possible sum and the product. There's lots of different ways to interpret that if you haven't read the stem of the question. So instead of these headers are just designed kind of as markers for the information from the stem. So we want to make sure we read that stem of the question first. And then it's important to recognize, should you work both columns together, or should you work one at a time? And that's going to be a decision based on the interplay between the two questions. Tonight isn't really about solving a lot of these math questions, and in this format it's a little harder for me, but I will show you some of those solutions. But in this case, the least possible sum when selecting an even number and the smallest prime number aren't really integrated together. You don't need to answer one in order to answer the other. So you would work each column independently. And you come up with the least sum. We have to interpret that in the same way you would interpret other math questions on the test. So you need the lowest numbers, and you need an even number from both sets. So that's going to be the 0 from set A and the 2 from set B. So the least possible sum when selecting an even number from each set will be 2. And you can see here I've put an X in lieu of filling in the bubble to show that that's the answer I've selected there. And then you're going to do the second part of the problem independently. So the product, when you choose the smallest prime number from each set, the smallest prime number from set A is going to be 3, and from set B is going to be 2. They're playing on your knowledge and understanding of primes. So again, for this column it's going to be 6, and I would mark that in this column. So this is a pretty basic example of them using two-part analysis to basically ask you two problem-solving questions at one time. And that's one of the ways that they're using that information. They can also, however, start to make the terms interactive. So let's look at this one, and let's read the stem. In the table below, choose the value of A and the value of B that are consistent with the statement above. Make only 2 selections, one in each column. So in this one, it tells me that the quotient of A over B is a multiple of 7. So you can see that these values are dependent on each other. What I choose for A is going to be dependent on what I choose for B. And while there may be multiple answers that work for one of them, they both have to work together. And this is where two-part analysis starts to really differ from anything that you've done previously. It starts to integrate the idea of picking 2 answers in a problem-solving environment. But again, the knowledge base that you're expected to understand and the techniques of solving the problems don't really change very much. In this question, we're going to apply strategy. We could just take all of these different sets of numbers and put one over the other and do the long division until we find one which is a multiple of 7. But with 6 different answers and no distinction of which one could be A or B, that is probably not going to be the most time-effective way of solving such a problem. So instead, what we're going to do is apply some strategy and identify the content. If I know that a quotient A is a multiple, A over B is a multiple of 7, then I know that A must be a multiple of 7, but that A must also be a multiple of B, because that's what is entailed in being a multiple. Now I can use that information to help me solve the problem. And I can use the information from my problem-solving background to realize that when the test is talking about multiples, they're probably talking about factoring in some sense or another. So I've gone ahead and factored out each one of these values. And since I know A must be a multiple of 7, then I know that A has to have 7 as a factor, which really limits what I could, what I could have for A to 3 different values, 28, 168, and 175. But to also know that A has to be a multiple of B, now I have to find a number within these multiples of 7 that also match the multiples of B. And so I find that combination in 12, which has the factors of 2, 2, and 3, and 168, which has the 2, 2, and the 3 of B, and the 7 that was talked about in the question stem. So again, it's really important here to take your time and make sure that you go back to the question and make sure you're answering the question that they've asked. Make sure that the value of A is the 168 and the B is the 12. So that's where two-part analysis is starting to differ from your basic everyday problem solving, because a lot of these problems are going to have interactive answer choices. The answers are going to depend on each other. So let's look at another one. And this is one that is very similar to some of the questions we've seen on the beta tests and in the new official guide, their online integrated reasoning section. And you can see a lot going on here. Select one value for A and one value for B that is consistent with the above information and which represents the relationship f of B equals A. So one thing that they've done here is they've reversed the A and B from the traditional order, allowing you the opportunity to pick numbers from the incorrect column. But other than that, this seems to be the same type of question that you might get in a function problem on problem solving. But the other difference that we're starting to notice, especially in two-part analysis, is the definitions of the values are starting to play a lot bigger role than they did in problem solving. If you've worked a lot of problem solving questions, you recognize that if it tells you that x is greater than 1 or x is not 0, they're generally doing that to make sure that the problem itself is solvable. But in two-part analysis, we're seeing that they're doing it more and more to create multiple answers for the test and have one be incorrect. Because if we were to solve this problem, we want to see that B cannot be 0, 1, or 2, because B is effectively taking the place of the x value, and the x value must be greater than 2 for this function to work. So then I can plug in the answer values for B, is essentially plugging in 4, and I get 20 minus 2 over 2 is 9. So there I've got a match of numbers. The 4 works with the 9. If we were to pick 2, we would also get a number which created a good function, but which isn't valid by the definitions. And same with 6 and 9. So you're really trying to find the two answer choices that work and function together, which means that the two-part analysis is going to require a lot more focus and attention to detail than some of the problem solving that you've seen before. So, but we want you to keep in mind on two-part analysis that this is the closest to what you've already been studying for in terms of problem solving and the rest of that. So when you see a problem such as this, in the table below, select the number of books produced by the machine in W seconds and the number of books produced in Z hours. Make only one selection, one in each column. And we know from the information that it takes a machine X minutes to produce Y books. We're still going to use the strategies that we might have in play in other sections. And in this type of algebraic question, the strategy we would recommend here is a plugging in or a picking a number type of strategy. And so here you can see that I've picked X is 2 minutes and Y is 3, just as some books, some good, easy, small numbers. And then I've picked that W is 240 seconds. I picked the 240 seconds because it's a nice multiple of minutes. It's 4 minutes. So, I'm sorry, it's 4 minutes. So in 4 minutes, 6 books are going to be produced. So we're still using that technique of using numbers instead of doing algebra that so many people recommend. Just because it's a new section doesn't mean that those techniques are lost to you. And in fact, they're proving very valuable in different parts of this section. So you can see then that I can plug these numbers into the answer choices and recognize that the 6 is the answer that I'm looking for, so I can pick B for the number of books produced in 240 seconds. And now I've got another thing which is books produced in Z hours. These could seem unrelated, although hours and minutes are somewhat related. So what you want to do is make sure that you're always using the same numbers and just replacing the one that you need. So in this case, I've still let X be 2 and Y be 3, but this time I've let Z be 2 hours. So I've had to choose another number for Z. I do the calculations to find out that I need the 180 books. And then once again, I can look to my column and figure out my solutions and realize that E, excuse me, I'm still not used to the 6 answer choice numbers, is going to be the answer that's going to match. So even though two-part analysis, these numbers are interplaying, it doesn't mean that you're going to need a whole new knowledge set, nor does it mean that you are going to need a new strategy set. A lot of the strategies and knowledge that we've been going from have remained the same. So that's what's great about two-part analysis. I got for better or for worse, I got the part that doesn't change very much. But within two-part analysis, we also don't know if we're going to be getting verbal or math. So those of you who've been studying in critical reasoning will recognize a very typical kind of strengthen and weaken question. In the table below, select one answer that would weaken in one sentence that strengthened the argument. Make only 2 selections, one in each column. And you're going to hear those explanations each time. So in this case, we're going to have to apply the same strategy that we would have to apply in a critical reasoning setup. So when you're looking to strengthen and weaken, there are things which you have to look for when you're reading the paragraph. And what you're looking for is that assumption or that gap in information. The difference is that the answer choices will both strengthen and weaken. So now you can't just rely on recognizing the topic, but you really have to understand what's going on within the question itself. Within the time constraints that we have with this webinar, I don't want to go too deep into detail with this question, but I do want to give you the answers. So here we have, and I have to move, there we go. Here we have, over the last 5 years, ratings for music stations have decreased significantly. Radio executives believe that the availability of digital music has caused a decrease in the number of people who listen to music on the radio. In order to increase radio ratings, executives have changed the formats of many radio stations around the country from music to talk. So essentially, the plan here is change the thing from music to talk, and that will increase the radio ratings because the availability of digital music is causing the decrease. So I have to strengthen that argument on one side and weaken that argument on the other. So that also means that you're going to have to keep your thoughts very organized and be very conscientious about your use of scratch paper and how you set this information up in order to keep your thoughts organized. So in this case, E, the overall decrease in radio ratings is less than that in music radio ratings. So that's the answer that's going to strengthen, because that's saying that there's room to have an increase for talk. And the answer that's going to weaken is if talk programming is also in digital form, then creating a talk platform may not entice the people who are already at the digital platform. So you see, this is, again, a way of them slipping two argument questions into one. Something else that they do, and I don't have an example of this because we're just kind of seeing them happen, is where one answer will depend on the other. So it may say something like, in the first column, strengthen the executive's opinion, and in the second column, give a fact that a critic would use to attack that strengthening point. So again, even within the verbal, you can start to see the interplay and interaction within the answer choices themselves. Oops, one more time in there. All right. Great slide. And then the other thing we're starting to see is a little bit more difference in the way they ask verbal questions. So we've seen a couple of these cause and effect questions pop up, enough so that I would think that this type of question will pop on an exam. So in this case, it says, indicate which cause and effect sequence would most likely result in decreased visitors to Citrus Park. Make only 2 selections. And then the park ranger goes ahead and talks about Citrus Park. We have recently been studying the reasons for the decrease in visitors at Citrus Park. One possible cause is the increase in the fire ant population at the park. A recent flood greatly reduced the lizard population, whose diets consist mostly of fire ants. It's also possible that the visitors are not properly disposing of picnic foods, a known source of fire ants. So here you have a bunch of causes and effects, and it's really important in this scenario to look at what you want the result to be. In this case, we want the result to be a decrease in visitors. So For visitors to decrease, we have to go up and figure out from this statement what is going to cause that type of decrease. And it gives us really only one possible cause, which is an increase in the fire ant population. And that's going to be important because as we look at each one of these causes and effects in the column, each one can be a part of a cause and effect relationship. For instance, if I have more lizards, then I am going to have fewer fire ants. That's because it says that the lizards are going to eat the fire ants. And so I have that here, an increase in the number of lizards, and I have the availability of a decrease in the number of fire ants. But I also have a decrease in lizards is going to cause an increase in fire ants. And I have those options. And then finally, I have a relationship between food and the ants. So this is where it becomes very important, not just to find a cause and effect relationship that is stated in the sentence, but one which leads to the result that they've asked for in the stem. In this case, decreased visitors. So I know that there's going to be fewer visitors if there's more ants. So I know I'm either going to have a decrease in lizards or an increase in the picnic food being left out. And that means that really only two of the answers are valid for picking, for giving the result which is asked for. And that is that I'm going to have to decrease the lizard population to increase the ant population, and thus that will decrease the visitors. So these cause and effect are asking you to look at various causes and various effects and kind of put them all together. So in this sense, it's the new type of question. It's asking for a more logical reasoning than the typical verbal reasoning that you've done before. So you may need to find a way to outline that logic or express it in a new way on your scratch paper. Because again, what we've really found on this test is that in the two-part analysis, there isn't a lot of difference in the knowledge set. We don't have to learn any new math or any new set, but you do have to put that knowledge together in a different way. And what two-part analysis allows them to do is to ask a lot of different types of questions. And so you have to be more adaptable, which is basically what this new integrative reasoning section is really about. Asking you, as a test taker, to become a little bit more adaptable in your logical reasoning and to be more flexible in what types of questions that are coming your way. So that's the basic presentation I have of two-part analysis. I don't have any grand new changes that are happening to that section. So I don't know if, oops, sorry. Let me see how I'm doing for time here. Yeah, okay, so that's been about 40 minutes, and I'd really like, I'm really much more interactive. I'd love to open it up for questions and make sure that everybody gets what they need out of today's section. Before I do that, I do want to kind of give the company a plug a little bit and say that we have started a new course. So we've completely revamped our course. Within our new course, we have 10 realistic practice GMAT tests, so you're going to have twice as many practice tests as we used to have. Another thing that we are adding to our course is 7 days a week we have live office hours online, and only expert instructors staff those office hours. And of course, for attending this webinar, we're happy to provide some discounts. I'll send Eric a flyer for you to see, but here's the basics of that flyer for what we're offering. The other thing that's great about our new classes is it's really going to be personalized instruction. All of our in-person classes are limited to 4 students. So it's a really new way of working in a small group to achieve those results that you're looking to achieve. So I just wanted to give that little plug, but I certainly want to open this up now to questions about the two-part analysis or the integrative reasoning section as a whole. I know that's been covered in the previous ones, but maybe not everyone's been here. So are we seeing any questions, Eric?
Well, thank you very much, Becky, for that wonderful overview of the two-part questions. And I think we are seeing actually a number of questions coming in. Let's see, the first one is from Sarah. So Sarah's asking, in the beginning, you referred to pages when discussing IR questions. How many pages of the two-part analysis should we expect from the exam?
That is a little unclear as right now, since they haven't put out the actual test. What we are seeing is probably between 2 and 4 of the 12 pages, and so one page will contain basically this type of information with 2 columns, and unlike multi-source analysis, each page of two-part analysis will be completely separate. So we're expecting from 2 to 4 two-part analysis type questions of the 12.
Great. I see another question from Sapin. For two-part analysis questions, would we have questions related to other verbal topics such as sentence correction or reading comprehension?
I have not yet seen anything related to sentence correction, which is probably a relief for most people, but I have certainly seen an adaptation of reading comprehension, especially in the types of questions that ask you why did the author use a specific piece of information. But keep in mind that that type of question is probably better asked in a multi-source reasoning where they can provide more tabs of information. In general, the two-part analysis has been related to very small paragraphs, so I would relate those more to critical reasoning than to reading comprehension. Although nothing's off the table, I haven't seen those come up too much yet.
Right. I see a clarifying question from Shori. So Shori's asking, just to confirm on the critical reasoning type of questions, for example, will we need to get both the strengthened and weakened columns correct in order to get credit? Yeah.
Yes. I understand that question. Yes, absolutely. On any one of the pages of questions, be it two-part analysis or any of the other pages of questions, in order to get credit for that page, you do need to get both or all of the answers correct on that page, which may lead to some strategy, because if there is a particular question that you are really stumped on, it may not be to your advantage to spend time trying to get the other question correct. There is no partial credit on this exam for each page. You have to get both of them correct.
Right. And, you know, for those of you who have been regulars to this series this week, also you have to submit a response, just to confirm. You can't skip questions in this section. So just one reminder of that as well.
Right, and along that same line, you can't go back through the section. So even though it's not an adaptive section, once you pick an answer and click that next button, those are the answers that you are left with. But you're perfectly correct,
right.
Eric.
You know, so many people who would take the GMAT in the Beat the GMAT community find that timing is one of the most challenging things about being successful in this test. And Tarun has a question related to timing, which is, what is the average number of minutes we should allot for two-part analysis? Do you have a recommendation for spending some amount of time and then just giving up guessing and moving on?
Well, it's a little hard to develop hard and fast timing rules as of yet, because we've really only seen examples of the scoring on the GMAT website, and it'll be a little bit more clear when actual scores start coming out. But if you look at it, you're going to have 12 pages of information in 30 minutes. So these two-part analysis questions, you're going to be looking at approximately 2 minutes per page of questions, because I think those multi-source reasoning tabs are designed to take up a little bit more time. So I would try to stay around that 2 minutes per page on a two-part analysis if you were going to try to finish all 12 pages of the integrated reasoning section.
Edward is asking a general question related to this section, which is, do we get a note board, you know, the typical writing note board as when we go through the section of GMAT?
Yeah, there shouldn't be any change to the note boards. You should get the same note boards you would be given during the essay section. So we are fully expecting you to get that bound copy of 5 note boards with that wet erase marker. The one thing we would recommend, however, is at the break between the integrated reasoning and the math, that you turn that in and get a new set of note boards, so that for math you have plenty of note paper if you're someone who takes a lot of notes. But yes, we fully expect you to get those note boards.
Becky, would it be possible for you to go back into your slides to the first example question that you presented? Because we see a lot of questions coming in about this.
Let me find it. Yes. Okay, this one?
I believe so. This is the first example question, yeah. So one question I'm seeing is, referring to your first example question, is 0 considered as an even number on the GMAT?
Yes, 0 is even on the...
Yeah. Sorry, Becky, you still there? Hello,
Can
Becky?
you still hear me, Eric?
Yeah, sorry.
Can you hear me now?
For a moment, it sounded like you cut off, but I think we got the response, which is 0 is an even question, even number.
Yes, 0 is. I'm sorry, my headset came unplugged for just a second, but okay. Yes, 0 is an even number on the GMAT.
Great. And let me see. Another question related to this example is, I have trouble with the term least possible sum. I interpret it as, let's see, as the least possible sum. I think, sorry, it's a little bit hard for me to interpret this. That I think that 2 is the smallest possible sum. Yeah, sorry. I think there's a little bit of questions about, like, how do you what do you define as least possible sum? Whether that's sorry, I'm trying to wrap my mind around this, and I'm looking at B here for some. Okay, so I think that they think the answer is 2 here.
Yes, and it is.
Yeah. Okay. Sorry. Okay, my apologies. I think there might have been a little bit of miscommunication on this question. So.
Oh, I apologize. Yes, you see, I've used X here to indicate the correct answers. It was kind of hard for me to replicate the bubbles, but yeah, because we're selecting an even number from each set. So on this question, one thing, the reason I picked this question is to kind of show the nuance in making sure that you read the stem and get all of that information from the stem. So in this case, we're selecting an even number from each set. So we'll select the lowest even number from each set, being 0 for set A and 2 for set B.
Okay, I see the clarification coming in from that person, which is I interpret least possible sum as the sum that has the minimum probability.
I do understand what you're saying, but that's typically not, if they were asking for a probability, they would use some form of probability language. This is just asking for the least sum which is possible. I think that's just an interpretation issue. So I'm not quite sure where that confusion is coming from.
There's also a lot of questions about your quotient example question. Would it be possible for you to bring that up? Yeah.
Absolutely.
So one from Ria. For this question, wouldn't using the calculator be quicker in answering?
Very good question, Ria, and it's important to talk about that calculator. Before you consider using the calculator on the exam, you should certainly get the practice exam and play with that calculator. The reason that it's not going to be is because the calculator is very cumbersome. And you're going to have to be typing in numbers, and you can't see what you've done before. So if you accidentally make a mistype, you won't know that you have. And what we've always found in tests that allow you to use calculators is that in general it's best not to use the calculator unless you have to. So when we're talking about things like multiples and factors, it's often better to find those prime factors. Now, I do want to clarify, because this was more of a presentation class than maybe a teaching class, that I wouldn't necessarily set each one of these rows of factors up on the exam. What I would do instead is recognize that A has to be a multiple of 7, and therefore eliminate any answer that could not be divided by 7 for the value of A. And then I would factor those remaining 3 values to find out which one would have matching factors in the B column. So it's not a matter of doing all of that work, but I did want to show how that work was presented. Great
question too.
And you can use the calculator. It's very clunky, and we found that it actually opens you up to more mistakes than it prevents, unless the math is very heavy in decimals or something like that.
And going back to our earlier discussion too, Becky, about timing, I have to imagine that working with a calculator is just one of those things that can slow you down on this test as well. So that's something to think about too, that sometimes these techniques, I know entering a calculator, I'm especially very careful to make sure that I get every single number correct, and maybe even double check at times, and that can be precious seconds in this particular section as well.
Yeah, and so and the calculator, it does. It's either going to take you more time, or it's going to lead you frustrated. More than a few times I've had students with calculators not be able to find the answer because they're inputting numbers backwards or something like that.
Okay, so can we move on to another example question? I see a lot of specific questions here. Your fire ants example.
Mm-hmm. Let me find that one.
Yeah.
I think this was, nope, that's radio stations. Okay.
Okay, so the question that I'm seeing here from Rusha is, why would it not be increased food, increased ants?
Okay, and it could be, Rusha, and this is the important part of these types of questions, because I really don't have an option in this question for increased food. And notice they're using another technique of kind of switching the language on you, because what answer choice E actually reads is increased trash collection to remove the food. So that would lead to a decrease in food, which would lead to a decrease in the fire ants. So this gets back to the idea that in this two-part reasoning, it's going to be very important to stay focused on the nuances in the language to make sure that you're getting the right answer. Because I think more than anywhere else, it's possible to think you've done all the right work and click 2 answers and really not have an indication that you've gone in the wrong direction.
Rishi is asking a very interesting question. How many sub-questions can you expect per question?
It depends on the type of question. So in two-part analysis, your page will look exactly like this, meaning there are 2 sub-questions using that terminology to 1 page of questions. If you're in graphics interpretation, there tends to be 2 sub-questions. In table analysis, there tend to be 3 sub-questions. And then in multi-source reasoning, there tend to be multiple pages having different numbers of sub-questions. But in two-part analysis, you're going to have 2 questions every time. And that is set for two-part analysis.
Great, and hopefully that answers your question pretty clearly, Rishi. Let's see. I think we have time for maybe 1 or 2 more questions here. Here's one that's coming in very relevant to you, Becky, which is, are there any integrated reasoning practice question resources available by the Princeton Review?
Absolutely. The Princeton Review has all of their 10 tests are integrated reasoning ready, which means once you get access to those materials, every one of the 10 tests will have a scored integrative reasoning. We also have several integrated reasoning drills up and running online right now. You can get access to those both by either becoming a tutoring student or enrolling in one of our courses, or we also now have an option where you can just buy our materials and get access to online database. But we've been very busy, and I've been very instrumental in creating new questions as quickly as we can so that everybody will have plenty of practice material to be able to practice this type of question. The GMAC has really only put out a few. The practice one from their practice exam appears to be the same for each test, and then they put out 50 multi-source reasoning questions if you buy a copy of the new official guide. So the Princeton Review certainly adds to that library of practice questions.
Wonderful. And Becky, I think this is going to be the last question that we have time for today, and this question is coming from Kimberly. With the new integrated reasoning section, do you know if we're going to get an immediate score at the end of the test, or do we have to wait to get the score with the essays later?
Very good question. So it is very similar to the essay. You will get the immediate unofficial score of just the math and verbal section. The integrative reasoning section is you're going to have to wait for it the same way that you wait for the essay score. And right now, with this being the new section, the GMAC has warned all students that the timeline to getting those official scores is going to be very close to the 20 days that they've always promised. So I would expect a 20-day wait before you get an integrative reasoning score. And just to add to that point, it's also important to note that the percentile of the integrated reasoning score could very well change as the months go on. They have said that instead of every 3 years, they're going to update the integrative reasoning percentiles every month for the first 6 months. So the percentile you receive even after those 20 days may not be stable. We're hoping they've done enough research that it will be pretty stable, but those percentiles will be changing.
Great. So we have been speaking with Becky Robinson, who is a Master Instructor for the Princeton Review. And Becky has just walked us through a great lesson with plenty of examples about two-part analysis, which is a new question type that will be tested in the integrated reasoning section of the GMAT starting June 5th of this year. And you know, as you can see these wonderful discounts in front of you, the Princeton Review has some really amazing promotions for people who are attending this webinar. $300 savings on the new GMAT small group instruction course, as well as $200 savings on the GMAT live online course. So you see these promotion codes up in front of you right now. Our team is going to email you as a follow-up if you signed up for this webinar with these details and instructions on how to get these savings. Really great deal, and on behalf of Beat The GMAT, we're very, very thankful for this generosity. So Becky, thank you so much for spending your evening with us and talking about two-part analysis.
Great. Thank you, Eric.
Wonderful. And again, just to remind folks, Becky is a frequent forum contributor on Beat The GMAT. So you'll likely encounter her posts if you're becoming active on our site, and we'll get to engage with her even more. And to our audience, thank you so much for spending your evening or your morning, wherever you are in the world, with us to learn about two-part analysis. And we've received many comments, actually, from members saying that they were attending all 5 sessions this week on integrated reasoning. And for those of you who are so dedicated in doing that, really appreciate that, and hope everyone who came to all or just part of this series benefited a lot and learned from integrated reasoning. So best of luck to you all, and hopefully you'll have a great success in integrated reasoning, and it'll be an easy breezy section for you when you take the new GMAT on June 5th. All the best, everyone.